All right, so your quiz tomorrow is on 2.1 and 2.2. So let's take a look at number 1. We need to graph the function and identify the axis of symmetry and vertex. So what form is this equation in? So we can easily identify the vertex when it's in vertex form. So what would our vertex be here? Perfect. 3, 4. And then what would our axis of symmetry be? X is equal to 3. Awesome. So then we go to our graph. We're going to graph our vertex at 3, 4. Our axis of symmetry goes right through it. How can we find more points for our graph?
Plug in numbers for the x's.
Perfect. So we're going to plug in numbers for x. What number can we plug in here?
3.
We already have, when we plug in 3, we get 4. So what's another number close to 3? Remember, we want to stick close to our axis of symmetry. So what's a number close to 3 that we can plug in?
4 or 2.
All right, let's plug in 4. So we have negative 2 times 4 minus 3 squared plus 4. Negative 2 times 1 squared plus 4. And then negative 2 plus 4, so this would give us 2. So when we plug in 4, we get 2. So our point, we're going to go to the right 4 and up 2. And since we're one space away on the right side of our axis of symmetry and up 2, we need to be one space away on the left side and up 2. So now that we have our 3 points, we can just connect them with our parabola. Any questions here?
So it doesn't matter if we did 2 or 4?
It doesn't matter. You could do 2, 4, 6. You could plug in 12, whatever you wanted to. But the closer you get to that axis of symmetry, the smaller your answer would be. Like if we plugged in, let's say we plugged in 8, our answer would be like all the way down here. Our point.
So it's just easier to graph to
Yeah.
how the. Alright. Thank you.
All right, let's take a look at number 2. Identify the axis of symmetry and the vertex. How do we find our axis of symmetry and vertex when it's in standard form? What's that formula we need to use to find axis of symmetry?
Negative b over 2a.
Perfect. I like that. So many of you answered that. Negative b over 2a. So we get our a, b, and c from our coefficients. So we have negative 6 over 2 times negative 1. So what did you guys get for the axis of symmetry?
-3.
Awesome. -3. Now how do we find our vertex?
Plugging in.
Plug it in. So that -3 is going to be our first number in our vertex. And then to find the second number, we plug it in. So we have -3 squared minus 6 times -3 plus 3. This would be -9 plus 18 plus 3. So 9 plus 3, we would get 12. So our axis of symmetry is x is equal to -3. And our vertex is -3, 12. Any questions on this one? Let's look at number 3. So here we have another one that is in vertex form. So here it's easiest just to start by naming the vertex. What would our vertex be here?
-2, 1.
Awesome. -2, 1. What is our axis of symmetry?
-2.
Perfect.
I have a question.
Yes.
How do you find the vertex so easily?
We get it from our h and k value. So here,
Okay.
this would be a times x minus h squared plus k. So our vertex is h comma k. We have to change the sign of what we pull from our parentheses, and then what we get outside of our parentheses is our k, and that sign stays the same.
Okay.
Any other questions on this one? All right, now we have one that is in intercept form. So we need to identify the axis of symmetry, vertex, and x-intercept. So let's start with our x-intercept. What would our x-intercept be?
2, 0, -4, 0.
Perfect. 2, 0, and -4, 0. So again, we have to make sure we switch the signs of what we get. So since it's -2, we change it to +2. Since it's +4, we change it to -4. Now, how do we find our axis of symmetry? What formula do we use when we have intercept form? Remember, we change the signs of both of these. So anytime it comes from the parentheses, we change the sign.
Okay.
So what do we need to do to find our axis of symmetry? We use the x-intercept, but how do we use them? What's our formula? Awesome. P plus Q divided by 2. So what's our P and what's our Q? What are the two numbers
2
that?
and 4.
Perfect.
2 and -4.
2 and -4. So 2 plus -4, we could just write 2 minus 4 divided by 2. This would be -2 over 2. And we would get -1. So our axis of symmetry is x is equal to -1. If we wanted to, we don't have to graph it here, but we know our axis of symmetry is always going to be directly in the middle of our x-intercepts. So if we have an x-intercept at 2, and if we have one at -4, we can just count and see what the middle is between, and it would be -1. So we know our axis of symmetry is going to go through -1. And now how do we find our vertex? What's the first number in our vertex going to be?
-1.
-1, and how do we find the second number?
Do you plug it in?
We plug it in. So we have 3 times -1 minus 2 times -1 plus 4. So -1 minus 2 would be -3, and -1 plus 4 would be +3. So 3 times -3 times +3 would be -27. So our y value in our vertex is -27. Any questions on this one? All right, let's look at number 5. So we're given the function f of x is equal to x squared, and we need to write a rule for g of x and identify the vertex. So we have a vertical shrink by a factor of 1/2. So what can we do to our equation to show that vertical shrink by a factor of 1/2? We multiply the outside by 1/2. Perfect. and a reflection in the y-axis. How do we show that?
A
Just
negative.
all parentheses.
Perfect. We multiply the inside by a negative, and then followed by a shift right 2. So how do we show a shift right 2?
Minus 2 in the parentheses.
Minus 2 in the parentheses. So we just need to apply each transformation one thing at a time. So we have 1/2 being multiplied to our outside. Now we have a negative that we need to multiply on the inside. What happens when we have a negative number squared?
It
There's
becomes
like two of
positive.
them.
It becomes positive. So remember, negative times a negative is a positive. So we just change this to 1/2 x squared because it becomes positive. And then last thing we have is our x minus 2 on the inside. So we change our x to x minus 2. So we have 1/2 times x minus 2 squared. So this is our new g of x. How do we identify the vertex? What would our vertex be here? Remember, our vertex is a coordinate point. So 2 is our x value. What would our y value be here?
0.
0. Awesome. So remember, since this is in vertex form, we get our vertex from h comma k. So we get our h and our k. We don't have a k here, so the k is 0.
Wait, I don't understand why you took the negative off the x.
In the blue, like where it's blue.
Yeah.
So any number, if we had, let's say, 2 squared, this would be 4. If we had negative 2 squared, this would also be 4. So these two things are the same because when we square a negative number, it becomes the positive. So that's why we got rid of the negative here. Because we don't need it. Because when it's squared, it's the positive value. So x squared is...
But would it be wrong if you put the negative?
If it were free response, I might take a point off. I'll give you partial credit just because I want it to be simplified. But if it were multiple choice, this would be one of your answer choices. Like you would see it like this. It wouldn't have a negative here.
Okay.
All right, let's look at number 6. So now our function is 6x squared minus 2. And again, we need to do the same thing, write a rule for g and identify the vertex. So we have a horizontal stretch by a factor of 2. How do we show a horizontal stretch by a factor of 2? We multiply 1/2 inside of our parentheses. So remember, when it's horizontal, we multiply by the reciprocal. So we flip it. What about a translation 3 units up?
Plus 3 on the outside.
Plus 3 on the outside. And then followed by a reflection on the y-axis.
Negative on the outside.
Negative on the outside. I'm going to change this. So in the review, guys, I'm going to change this to the x-axis. Just because on the quiz, you'll see x-axis. So I want to make sure. And we did y-axis in the other one. So I'm going to change this to the x-axis. So what do we do for a reflection on the x-axis?
Negative on the inside.
Negative on the outside when it's x. So guys, I just changed this question to be a reflection on the x-axis, just so we can have some practice with that. Okay, so now we need to apply each transformation one thing at a time. So when we have a horizontal stretch by a factor of 1/2, by a factor of 2, we're multiplying the inside by 1/2. So here we have 6 times 1/2 x squared minus 2. Now we need to simplify this. So when we square 1/2 times x, we need to square the 1/2 and square the x. So this would be 6. 1/2 squared would be 1/4 times x squared minus 2. And then 6 times 1/4 would be 6/4 times x squared minus 2. And then we can simplify to 3/2 x squared. So all I did was plug in.
Why can't we just leave it in the parentheses?
Because we need to simplify. So again, if you see this as a multiple choice question, it's going to be in the simplest form. So you got to know what it looks like when we simplify.
Why is there a -2 and not a +3?
We haven't done that yet. We're just looking at our function here. So now we can move on to the translation of 3 units up. So we add 3 to the outside. So we have 3/2 x squared minus 2 plus 3 would be a plus 1. So now I applied our translation 3 units up. And then the last thing we have to do is our reflection on the x-axis. So we multiply the outside by a negative. So this would be negative 3/2 x squared plus 1. Now we need to identify our vertex. What would our vertex be here? Perfect. 0, 1. So this, it doesn't look like it's in vertex form, but it could be in vertex form or standard form. We could say either one. We have nothing that's being added inside of our parentheses, so our h would be 0, and what's being added outside of our parentheses would be 1. So our vertex is 0, 1. We could also say that this was in standard form, so we would just do -b/2a. And we don't have a b here because we don't have that x term, so it would be 0/2 times -3/2. When you have 0 on top, it's 0. So either way you want to look at this, you can look at it if it were in vertex form, and you can easily identify it. You have nothing being added inside, so your x value is 0, your h is 0, and your k is +1. Or if you thought about it in standard form, you would use your equation that we have for standard form. Okay, any questions from this page? All right, number 7. We're given the function 2x squared minus 12x, and we need to find the max or min, domain, range, increasing and decreasing. So here it doesn't tell us that we need to graph it, but it will help us if we do graph it. And again, it doesn't ask for the vertex or axis of symmetry, but it helps us if we find them, just because that'll help us graph it, and then we can easily identify whether it has a max, min, domain, range, and where it's increasing and decreasing. So how do we find our vertex here?
-b/2a.
-b/2a. So we have our a, b, and then our c is 0. So we have -12 over 2 times 2. So this would be 12/4. So our axis of symmetry would be 3. So that would mean our first number in our vertex is 3. How do we find the second number in our vertex? Plug it in. So we have 2 times 3 squared minus 12 times 3. 2 times 3 squared would be 18, and 12 times 3 would be 36. Yes. 18 minus 36 would be negative 18. So our y value in our vertex is negative 18. So on our graph, we're going to go to the right 3 and then down 18. Does our graph open up or open down?
Open up.
It opens up. Since our A is positive, it opens up. So does our graph here have a max or a min? Is our vertex at the maximum or at the minimum?
Minimum.
Minimum. So we have a min. And what is our value of our minimum?
Negative 18.
Negative 18. Awesome. So remember, we get our minimum value from our y value in our vertex. Now, what is our domain of our graph?
All real numbers.
All real numbers. It's always going to be all real numbers when it's a parabola. What is our range?
Negative 18, comma, infinity.
Perfect. Negative 18 to infinity. On the quiz, if this were multiple choice, it would say y is greater than or equal to negative 18. So it's just saying all the y values are greater than or equal to negative 18. And then if we were standing here on the left side of our graph and moving to the right, do we start out increasing or decreasing? So from this point to our vertex, are we increasing or decreasing?
Decreasing?
We're decreasing, so we're walking downhill, we would be decreasing. So this is to the left side of our vertex, so we would be decreasing left of 3. So again, we look at our x value in our vertex, and then the right side of 3, what are we doing?
Increasing.
Increasing. So we are increasing to the right side of 3. All right, let's look at number 8. So we're given the function 3x cubed plus 6x minus 24. We need to find the axis of symmetry, the vertex, and the y-intercept. So what formula do we use for our axis of symmetry here?
B over 2a.
Perfect, negative b over 2a. What is our b?
Negative 6.
Well, our b would be 6, but we have a negative b, so it would be negative 6. And then what's our a?
3.
3. So then what would our axis of symmetry be?
Negative 1.
Perfect. So we get negative 6 over 6. This would be negative 1. So now what would our first value in our vertex be?
Negative 1.
And then how do we find the second value? Thank you.
Plug it in.
Plug it in. So we have 3 times negative 1 squared plus 6 times negative 1 minus 24. This would be 3 minus 6 minus 24. 3 minus 6 would be negative 3. Negative 3 minus 24 would be negative 27. So our axis of symmetry would be x is equal to negative 1, our vertex, negative 1, negative 27. And then how do we find our y-intercept? Remember, our y-intercept is 0, comma, c. What is our c here?
Negative 24.
Perfect, negative 24. So our y-intercept is when x is 0. We could plug in 0 into this equation, but we always know we're going to get c when it's in standard form. So our y-intercept is negative 24. Any questions on this one? All right, last one, number 8. Again, we're doing the same thing. We need to find our axis of symmetry, vertex, and y-intercept. What's our formula for axis of symmetry?
Negative b divided by 2. A.
Perfect. What is our b?
0.
Negative 1.
0. Remember, our b is always what's in front of the x term. We don't have an x term here, so our b is 0. And then our a would be negative 1. But once we have 0 on top of our fraction, we get 0. So our axis of symmetry is x is equal to 0. What would our vertex be?
It'd be 0.
And then what do we get when we plug in 0?
Negative 1.
Awesome. So this would be negative 0 squared, which is just 0 minus 1, so negative 1. And then what would our y-intercept be?
0, negative 1.
Awesome. 0, negative 1. All right, if you guys know how to do everything on this review, you're going to do excellent on the quiz tomorrow.